Jasmine Washington stands triumphantly at the airport gate, watching a bewildered Harold Reynolds frantically searching for another first-class seat on any flight out of Atlanta. Flight attendants whisper as Jasmine holds a stack of boarding passes. Sometimes justice costs exactly $74,000, Jasmine thinks. Before we dive into how Jasmine reached this incredible moment, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe if you're ready to see what happens when someone finally stands up against everyday racism. How far would you go to fight discrimination? The morning before this airport showdown began like any other for Jasmine Washington. At 34, she had already established herself as one of the most brilliant corporate attorneys at Thompson & Mitchell, a prestigious law firm in Atlanta. Her corner office on the 27th floor overlooked the city she'd fought so hard to conquer professionally. Today was particularly important. Jasmine carefully arranged documents inside her leather portfolio, preparing for tomorrow's crucial meeting in New York with Evercore Industries, a potential client that could transform the firm's financial outlook. Landing this account would not only benefit the firm but potentially secure her long-awaited partnership. Everything ready for tomorrow? Curtis Brooks, her direct supervisor, appeared in her doorway without knocking. At 55, Curtis embodied the firm's old guard, white, male, and connected to all the right people through decades of golf club memberships and fraternity ties. Yes, everything's prepared, Jasmine replied, maintaining her professional composure despite his intrusion. The presentation's finalized, and I've researched their previous legal entanglements thoroughly. Curtis nodded, his expression serious. You understand how important this client is, right? The partners are watching this one closely. The unspoken implication hung in the air, her advancement depended on this success. I understand completely, Jasmine assured him, though she couldn't help wondering if her white colleagues received the same thinly veiled warnings before their big pitches. After Curtis left, Jasmine returned to reviewing her materials. As the first person in her family to attend college, she'd overcome countless obstacles. Graduating at the top of her class from Howard Law School had earned her recruitment offers from several prestigious firms. She'd chosen Thompson & Mitchell despite its reputation for being slow to diversify because their corporate client list offered the experience she wanted. 5 years later, she'd outlasted every other black attorney hired in her cohort. The daily microaggressions were exhausting, colleagues expressing surprise at her articulation, clients assuming she was administrative staff, partners assigning her diversity-related pro bono work rather than high-profile cases. Yet she persevered, building an impressive portfolio of successful cases and client relationships. Jasmine worked late into the evening, refining her presentation and anticipating potential questions. When she finally checked the time, it was past 9. She needed to book her flight to New York for the following morning. The meeting was too important to risk any travel delays, so she splurged on a first-class ticket, a luxury she rarely allowed herself, but one she felt was justified given the circumstances. Before leaving the office, she called her grandmother Eloise, now 78, who had raised her after her mother's death. "Hey, Grandma," Jasmine said, her voice softening as it always did when speaking to the woman who had sacrificed so much for her. "There's my busy lawyer," Eloise replied warmly. "How are you doing, baby?" "Good, just preparing for a big meeting tomorrow in New York. If it goes well, that partnership we've been talking about might finally happen." "I'm so proud of you," Eloise said. "Your grandfather would have been too. He always said you'd break through any ceiling they'd put above you." The mention of her grandfather, who had marched with Dr. King and instilled in her a sense of dignity that transcended others' prejudices, strengthened Jasmine's resolve. "I'm trying, Grandma. I promise I'll visit soon." "You better. I made your favorite sweet potato pie last weekend." After hanging up, Jasmine gathered her materials and headed home to her apartment in Midtown. The night before major presentations, sleep often eluded her. She rehearsed her pitch repeatedly, refining her delivery while battling the anxiety that came with such high stakes. As a black woman in corporate law, she knew the margin for error was non-existent. Excellence wasn't just an aspiration, it was a requirement for basic respect. She finally fell asleep around midnight, her alarm set for 5 a.m. to ensure ample time to reach the airport for her 8 a.m. flight to New York. Tomorrow would determine so much about her future, but she felt prepared for whatever challenges awaited her in the Evercore boardroom. What she couldn't anticipate was the battle she would face before even leaving Atlanta. Jasmine arrived at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport at 6:15 a.m., dressed immaculately in a tailored navy suit that had cost nearly a month's rent. Her appearance was flawless, hair perfectly styled, makeup professional, not a wrinkle in sight. She had learned early in her career that, unlike her white colleagues, she couldn't afford casual travel days. Her credibility seemed perpetually tied to her appearance. Despite her professional demeanor and attire, subtle reminders of society's biases followed her through the terminal. At security, the TSA agent scrutinized her ID longer than the white businessman ahead of her, squinting suspiciously between her face and the photo as if they couldn't possibly match. "Business or pleasure?" he asked, a question Jasmine hadn't heard him pose to previous travelers. "Business," she replied simply, maintaining her composure while placing her laptop and toiletries in separate bins. After clearing security, Jasmine stopped at a coffee shop near her gate. The barista greeted the white man ahead of her with a cheerful, "Good morning, sir. What can I get started for you today?" When Jasmine stepped forward, the same barista's expression shifted subtly, the warmth disappearing as she asked flatly, "Next order?" Jasmine pushed these interactions from her mind as she approached the first-class lounge. Her ticket included access, a perk she rarely experienced. At the entrance, the receptionist, a young white woman with a blonde ponytail, looked up with a rehearsed smile that quickly faltered. "Membership card?" she asked immediately, despite Jasmine already extending her boarding pass. "I have a first-class ticket," Jasmine explained, maintaining her professional tone. The receptionist examined her boarding pass with obvious skepticism. "One moment while I verify this," she said, typing something into her computer while Jasmine waited patiently, aware of other travelers entering without similar scrutiny. Finally admitted, Jasmine found a quiet corner of the lounge to review her presentation once more. The space was predominantly occupied by white men in business attire, many loudly discussing deals and acquisitions on phone calls, seemingly unconcerned about privacy. From a nearby seating area, Jasmine overheard a particularly loud conversation. A white man in his early 60s, with silver hair and an expensive watch that caught the light with each emphatic gesture, was speaking to someone about a recent business acquisition. "We're absorbing 3 of those smaller firms in the Atlanta area," he boasted. "These black-owned businesses don't have the capital to compete long-term. It's just smart business to wait until they're struggling and then acquire them at discount prices." Jasmine felt her jaw tighten but remained focused on her own work. She'd encountered countless Harold Reynoldses throughout her career, men who viewed diversity as a threat rather than strength, who disguised prejudice as business acumen. When boarding was announced, Jasmine gathered her belongings and proceeded to the first-class lane. The same man she'd overheard was ahead of her, still talking loudly on his phone about cleaning house once the acquisition was complete. Jasmine presented her boarding pass to the gate agent and proceeded down the jetway. As she approached her assigned seat, 2B, she realized with dismay that the man from the lounge was taking his place in 2A, directly beside her. He looked up as she stored her briefcase in the overhead compartment, his expression shifting from neutral to visibly displeased. Before Jasmine could even settle in her seat, he pressed the flight attendant call button repeatedly. A flight attendant with "Melissa Parker" on her name tag quickly appeared. "Yes, sir. How can I assist you?" "There must be some mistake," Harold said loudly, not bothering to lower his voice or acknowledge Jasmine's presence directly. "I specifically book first class to avoid certain situations. Are there any other seats available?" Melissa's eyes darted uncomfortably between Harold and Jasmine. "Sir, the flight is completely full today. Is there a particular issue with your seat? Look, Harold lowered his voice slightly, though still audible to Jasmine and nearby passengers, I paid good money for this seat. I don't understand why these people are getting upgrades these days. It dilutes the whole first-class experience. The phrase, "these people," hung in the air. Several passengers glanced over before quickly averting their eyes, unwilling to involve themselves. Jasmine sat perfectly still, her expression neutral despite the burning humiliation and anger rising within her. This was far from the first time she'd encountered such treatment, but it never hurt less. Melissa shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, all our first-class passengers have either purchased their tickets or earned upgrades through our loyalty program." Her tone was apologetic, but directed at Harold rather than addressing his inappropriate behavior. "Well, something needs to be done," Harold insisted, gesturing dismissively toward Jasmine without making eye contact. "I can't sit here for the entire flight." Throughout this exchange, not a single passenger spoke up. Some pretended to be absorbed in books or devices, while others watched with uncomfortable expressions, but no one intervened. Jasmine felt simultaneously hypervisible and invisible, her presence enough to cause a scene, yet her dignity apparently not worth defending. Jasmine took a deep breath and settled into her seat, determined to maintain her composure. She'd navigated countless professional spaces where she was unwelcome, this was merely another. Opening her laptop, she began reviewing her presentation, acting as though Harold's behavior hadn't affected her at all. Harold wasn't satisfied. The moment Jasmine seemed to ignore him, he jabbed the call button again. Melissa returned promptly, her professional smile strained. "Yes, sir." "I have severe allergies," Harold announced loudly. "This woman's perfume is aggravating my condition." He made an exaggerated sniffing motion, despite the fact that Jasmine wore no perfume, having learned early in her career that even scents could become ammunition for criticism. "I'm not wearing any perfume," Jasmine stated calmly, addressing Melissa directly. Melissa looked trapped between them, clearly uncomfortable with the situation but unwilling to directly challenge a first-class passenger, particularly one who fit the profile of the airline's typical high-value customer. "Perhaps," Melissa suggested quietly to Jasmine, "you would be more comfortable in another seat? I believe there's one available in premium economy." The implication was clear. Rather than addressing Harold's behavior, the simplest solution was to move the person being discriminated against. Jasmine felt a familiar weight settle in her chest, the burden of always being expected to compromise, to accommodate, to make others comfortable at her own expense. "No, thank you," Jasmine replied firmly. "I purchased a first-class ticket for this seat specifically, and that's where I'll remain for the duration of the flight." Harold scoffed. "This is ridiculous. The customer service on this airline has gone completely downhill." Other passengers were now openly watching the drama unfold, though still from the safety of silence. A few exchanged glances, but no one intervened. The confrontation escalated when the flight attendants began serving pre-flight beverages. When Melissa handed Harold his requested champagne, he shifted in his seat, accidentally, causing the glass to tip. Champagne spilled across Jasmine's lap and onto the presentation materials she'd been reviewing. "Oh, how clumsy of me," Harold said with transparent insincerity. "These seats are just so cramped nowadays." Jasmine grabbed napkins from her tray table, trying to blot the liquid from her documents, papers representing weeks of preparation now stained and partly illegible. Her hands trembled slightly, but she refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her lose control. The commotion finally drew the attention of the captain, who emerged from the cockpit to assess the disturbance delaying departure. Captain Benjamin Taylor, a white man in his late 40s, surveyed the situation with obvious impatience. "What seems to be the problem here?" he asked, his gaze moving between Harold and Jasmine. "This gentleman spilled his drink on me and my work materials," Jasmine explained calmly. "It appears to have been deliberate following his complaints about sitting next to me." "That's absurd," Harold interjected before Captain Taylor could respond. "It was clearly an accident. And I simply expressed concerns about her strong perfume triggering my allergies. Again, I'm not wearing perfume, Jasmine stated. Captain Taylor seemed more concerned with the flight's departure time than resolving the situation justly. Sir, ma'am, we need to depart. Can we all just settle down and have a peaceful flight? His equivocation, treating targeted harassment and the response to it as equally problematic, was yet another microaggression Jasmine had to absorb. The captain's request for peace prioritized the schedule and comfort of uninvolved passengers over addressing discrimination. As the situation reached an impasse, another flight attendant approached quietly from behind. Darnell Johnson, a young black man whose name tag indicated he was newer to the crew, handed Jasmine a stack of cocktail napkins and a bottle of club soda. "This might help with the stains," he said softly. "And I have some extra paper if you need to reprint anything." He glanced at her soaked documents with genuine concern. "Thank you," Jasmine responded, grateful for this small act of acknowledgement and kindness. Harold, meanwhile, had escalated his demands. "This is unacceptable. I refuse to sit here for the entire flight. Either move me to another first-class seat or remove me from the plane entirely." Captain Taylor, clearly prioritizing departure over justice, nodded to Melissa. "Please check if we can accommodate the gentleman's request." After a brief consultation with other crew members, Melissa returned. "Sir, we don't have any other first-class seats available. If you'd prefer to take a different flight, we can arrange that, but we need to depart now." "Fine," Harold snapped, gathering his belongings. "I'll rebook. This is absolutely ridiculous." As he stood to exit, he made a point of loudly announcing, "I'll be speaking to William about this. He and I play golf together every month." The invocation of the airline CEO's first name, whether a truthful connection or not, was clearly intended to intimidate the staff and remind everyone of his perceived importance and influence. As Harold finally exited the aircraft, Jasmine could feel dozens of eyes on her. Some passengers looked sympathetic, others resentful of the delay, but not one had spoken up in her defense during the entire ordeal. The plane departed 20 minutes behind schedule. Jasmine spent the flight trying to salvage her presentation materials and process what had just happened. When Darnell offered her an extra dessert from the first-class meal service, his small gesture of solidarity nearly brought tears to her eyes, not because of the dessert itself, but because it was the only acknowledgement that what she'd experienced was wrong. The Evercore Industries headquarters towered over Midtown Manhattan, its glass exterior reflecting clouds that threatened rain, fitting weather for Jasmine's turbulent mood. Despite arriving in New York with time to spare, she felt emotionally drained. The airport confrontation replayed in her mind as she rode the elevator to the 38th floor, each recollection stoking her anger anew. She'd spent her entire professional life compartmentalizing such incidents, pushing them aside to focus on work. Today, that familiar strategy was failing her. As the elevator doors opened to Evercore's reception area, Jasmine took a deep breath. This meeting was too important to let Harold Reynolds derail her career. Jasmine Washington for the 10 o'clock with Ms. Wilson, she informed the receptionist, who directed her to a sleek conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. Within minutes, Tanya Wilson entered the room. As CEO of Evercore Industries, Tanya had built a reputation as a formidable businesswoman. At 53, she was one of the few black female CEOs of a Fortune 500 company, a fact not lost on Jasmine. "Ms. Washington," Tanya extended her hand. "I've heard impressive things about your work at Thompson & Mitchell." The meeting proceeded with Jasmine delivering her presentation on Thompson & Mitchell's proposed legal strategy for Evercore's expansion. Despite her best efforts to focus, Jasmine noticed herself stumbling over details she normally would have recited effortlessly. Twice she lost her train of thought, the memory of champagne spilling across her original notes intruding at crucial moments. Nevertheless, she completed the presentation professionally. When she finished, Tanya studied her thoughtfully. "Your firm's credentials are impressive," she acknowledged. But I'm curious about something, Ms. Washington. You come highly recommended, yet today you seem distracted. That doesn't align with what I've heard about you. Jasmine hesitated, weighing her options. Professional convention dictated keeping personal matters separate from business. Yet something about Tanya's direct approach invited honesty. You're right, Jasmine admitted. I experienced an unpleasant incident on my flight here this morning. I apologize if it affected my presentation. What kind of incident? Tanya asked. Jasmine briefly described what had happened with Harold Reynolds, keeping her explanation concise and professional despite the emotions it stirred. When she finished, Tanya was silent for a moment. Would you join me for coffee after we wrap up here? I believe we have more to discuss. An hour later, they sat in a quiet corner of a nearby cafe, away from the bustling midtown lunch crowd. What you experienced this morning, Tanya began, stirring her coffee, is unfortunately familiar to me. 20 years ago, I was removed from first class because a white passenger complained. The airline claimed it was a seating error, but I knew better. Jasmine felt a weight lift slightly, the validation of shared experience was powerful. How did you handle it? She asked. Not nearly as gracefully as you, Tanya smiled. I filed complaints that went nowhere. But it taught me something valuable about picking battles. Some aren't worth the energy, but others define who we are. Their conversation shifted to strategies for navigating predominantly white corporate spaces while maintaining dignity and sanity. As they talked, Jasmine felt a mentorship forming that transcended the potential client relationship. Before they parted, Tanya said, I'll be making my decision about legal representation by the end of the week, but I wanted you to know how impressed I am with Thompson and Mitchell's proposal, and with you personally. Back at her hotel, Jasmine checked her return flight details for the following evening. Her stomach tightened when she saw she was again booked in first class, a section she'd saved for months to afford for this important trip. Out of curiosity, she searched other passengers on the flight using the airline's app feature that showed available seats. There, listed as confirmed in first-class seat 3A, was a familiar name, Harold Reynolds. Seeing his name triggered something in Jasmine. Throughout her career, she'd absorbed countless microaggressions, always taking the high road by not creating scenes or demanding justice. Where had that strategy gotten her? Still facing the same discrimination, still fighting the same battles, still silently absorbing other people's bigotry to maintain professionalism. She opened her banking app and checked her savings account, funds she'd been accumulating for years toward a down payment on a condo. The balance represented countless sacrifices and extra hours worked. Then she made a decision that would change everything. Jasmine called the airline's customer service line. After navigating the automated system, she connected with a representative named Andrea Collins. How can I assist you today? Andrea asked. I'd like to purchase all remaining first-class seats on tomorrow evening's flight from JFK to Atlanta, Jasmine stated calmly. I'm sorry. Andrea sounded confused. You want all the seats? Yes. Every remaining first-class seat. I understand this is an unusual request, but I'm willing to pay full price for each one. There was a pause. May I ask why you need all these seats? Jasmine briefly explained the situation with Harold Reynolds. As she spoke, she could hear Andrea's tone shifting from confusion to understanding. I see, Andrea said finally. Let me check what's available and what this would cost. After several minutes of typing and consultations with supervisors, Andrea returned. We have 9 unsold first-class seats. At current rates, purchasing all of them would cost approximately $74,000. Jasmine took a deep breath. I'll take them. What would you do if you were in Jasmine's position? Would you spend your savings to make a point, or would you find another way to address the situation? Comment number 1 if you think Jasmine is justified in spending her savings this way, or number 2 if you think she's going too far. Hit like and subscribe if you want to see more stories about people fighting back against everyday racism. Now, let's see how Jasmine gathers the resources for her bold plan. $74,000. The figure echoed in Jasmine's mind as she hung up the phone with Andrea. What had she just done? The rational part of her brain, the careful attorney who analyzed risks and rewards, screamed that this was financial madness. Yet another part, perhaps the part connected to her grandfather who'd faced fire hoses in Birmingham, felt a profound sense of rightness. Still, $74,000 wasn't a sum she could simply withdraw without consequences. Her savings would cover it, but that would mean setting her life plans back significantly. She needed to be strategic. First, Jasmine called her bank and arranged for a short-term loan using her upcoming bonus as collateral. Curtis had all but guaranteed the bonus if she landed the Evercore account, which now seemed likely given her connection with Tanya Wilson. This would cover about half the cost without completely depleting her savings. Next, she contacted her friend Taylor Wilson, who worked in the airline's corporate office. They'd met at a National Black Law Students Association conference years ago and had stayed in touch. "You did what?" Taylor exclaimed when Jasmine explained her purchase. "I know it sounds extreme," Jasmine admitted. "But I need to make sure the airline doesn't resell those seats or allow Harold to upgrade from economy. Can you help me ensure that doesn't happen?" Taylor hesitated. "Technically, you own those tickets now, so they can't resell them. But someone with connections might convince a gate agent to make an exception. I'll flag the reservation to prevent that." She paused. "Are you sure about this, Jasmine? That's a lot of money to spend on making a point." It wasn't the first doubtful response Jasmine would receive. When she called her close friend Marcus Davis, a fellow attorney, his reaction was similar. "You're spending your condo down payment to teach some racist businessman a lesson he'll probably never learn?" Marcus questioned. "Jasmine, I understand the impulse, but this seems excessive." "Maybe it is," Jasmine acknowledged. "But I'm tired, Marcus. Tired of always taking the high road while people like Harold Reynolds never face consequences. For once, I want someone like him to experience even a fraction of the discomfort he casually inflicts on others." Her conversation with her grandmother Eloise was more difficult. Eloise had grown up in Jim Crow, Alabama, where standing up to white people's racism could be literally fatal. Her generation had survived by keeping their heads down, not by making spectacles. "Baby, I worry about you," Eloise said after Jasmine explained her plan. "That's your future home you're spending." "I know, Grandma. But maybe this is more important than a down payment right now." There was a long pause. "Your grandfather would have understood," Eloise finally said. "He always said sometimes you have to pay the price for your dignity up front." Her voice warmed. "Just promise me you'll be careful. People like that man, they don't like being challenged." Strengthened by her grandmother's eventual support, Jasmine contacted the National Coalition for Civil Rights, speaking with an attorney who specialized in transportation discrimination cases. She wanted to ensure her actions couldn't somehow be twisted against her legally. "Document everything," the attorney advised. "The original incident, any communications with the airline, everything. If this escalates, that documentation will be crucial." Word of Jasmine's plan began circulating among her professional network, generating mixed reactions. Some colleagues thought she was heroically standing up against discrimination. Others worried she was jeopardizing her career over a personal vendetta. The divided response reflected the complicated reality of addressing racism in America. Even clear instances of discrimination became controversial when confronted directly. Jasmine spent the evening creating a detailed plan for maximizing the impact of her expensive statement while minimizing personal risk. She drafted responses to potential media inquiries, outlined social media posts she might make, and prepared for various scenarios that might unfold at the airport. If she was going to spend $74,000 making a point, she was determined to make it effectively. Her planning was interrupted by an unexpected call from a blocked number. When she answered, a male voice identified himself as Darnell Johnson, the flight attendant who had shown her kindness during the incident. "I hope you don't mind me contacting you," he said. "I got your number from passenger records. I probably shouldn't be doing this, but after what I witnessed yesterday, I wanted to help." "Help how?" Jasmine asked cautiously. "I heard about your ticket purchase through company gossip. It's causing quite a stir internally." Darnell paused. "I also know that Harold Reynolds has been accommodated on your return flight despite your buying those seats. He has platinum executive status, and the airline automatically rebooks elite members when they miss flights." This news alarmed Jasmine. "So my plan won't work?" "It still can. I'm working that flight, and I have access to the manifest. Reynolds is confirmed for first class again, but his seat assignment isn't finalized. If you're really doing this, I can make sure he doesn't end up in first class despite his status. Why would you risk your job to help me?" Jasmine asked. Darnell was quiet for a moment. "Because I've watched passengers like him mistreat people who look like us for 3 years, and the airline always prioritizes their comfort over our dignity. Someone needs to challenge that, even if just once." After hanging up, Jasmine worked late into the night, preparing for both her professional responsibilities and her personal battle. Around midnight, her phone rang again. This time it was Stephanie Garcia, the airline's customer relations director. "Ms. Washington," Stephanie began formally, "I'm calling regarding your unusual ticket purchase earlier today. While we value your business, we wanted to understand the nature of this transaction." "I'm sure Andrea documented my explanation," Jasmine replied calmly. "She did," Stephanie confirmed. "And that's precisely why I'm calling. If you experience discrimination on our airline, we have proper channels to address that. Purchasing multiple seats isn't necessary. With all due respect, Ms. Garcia, I've seen how proper channels typically handle these situations. I've made my decision and completed a legitimate transaction for these tickets. They're mine to use as I see fit." There was a pause before Stephanie responded. "Very well. I should inform you that your transaction has been flagged as unusual by our fraud department, but I'll ensure it's cleared. The tickets are yours, Ms. Washington." As Jasmine finally prepared for bed, she wondered if she was making the right choice. $74,000 was an enormous sum to spend on a principal. Yet as she drifted off to sleep, she couldn't help but think of all the black women who'd never had the financial means to fight back against daily indignities. Perhaps her privilege came with a responsibility to use it. JFK Airport hummed with activity as Jasmine arrived 3 hours before her scheduled departure. Her extra-early arrival wasn't from anxiety about missing her flight, but to ensure her plan unfolded perfectly. Dressed in another impeccable suit, burgundy today, projecting both power and confidence, she approached the first-class check-in counter with purpose. "Good afternoon," she greeted the agent, presenting her ID and confirmation number. "I'm checking in for the Atlanta flight, and I'll need to collect all 10 of my boarding passes." The agent, whose name tag read Patricia, looked confused. 10 boarding passes? "Yes," Jasmine confirmed calmly. "I purchased 10 first-class seats on this flight." She slid the email confirmation across the counter. Patricia's fingers tapped rapidly at her keyboard, her expression shifting from confusion to surprise. "You actually did purchase all these seats. May I ask why you need 10 tickets for yourself?" "I don't," Jasmine replied. "I'll be distributing 9 of them to other passengers." This was clearly outside Patricia's regular protocol. "Let me speak with my supervisor." While waiting, Jasmine surveyed the terminal. Her plan wasn't simply to prevent Harold Reynolds from flying first class. That would be $74,000 poorly spent. Instead, she intended to transform her act of resistance into something more meaningful, a redistribution of privilege, even if just for one flight. Patricia returned with her supervisor, Michael Torres, who approached with professional caution. Ms. Washington, I understand you've purchased multiple first-class seats with the intention of giving them away. That's correct. While there's technically no policy against this, it's highly unusual. These tickets are non-transferable. I'm not transferring or reselling them, Jasmine clarified. I purchased them, and I'll be personally inviting select individuals to occupy them as my guests. After additional consultation and verification of Jasmine's identity, they reluctantly printed all 10 boarding passes. Jasmine thanked them and moved toward the security checkpoint, 10 valuable tickets securely in her portfolio. Once past security, Jasmine began the most important phase of her plan. Rather than randomly distributing the tickets, she thoughtfully observed her fellow travelers, looking for specific individuals. Her first selection was a young black man standing in line at a coffee kiosk, medical textbooks visible in his open backpack. Jasmine approached him with a warm smile. "Excuse me, are you a medical student?" Startled, he nodded. "Yes, third year at Howard. Just finished some residency interviews in New York." "I'm Jasmine Washington," she introduced herself, explaining her unusual offer of a first-class seat. Andre Thompson listened with increasing astonishment. "You're serious? You're just giving away a first-class ticket?" "I am. Consider it an investment in the future of medicine." Andre accepted with grateful disbelief, and Jasmine continued her mission. Her next selection was an elderly Latino couple who were carefully counting cash to purchase snacks, clearly on a tight budget. When Jasmine offered them 2 first-class seats, Senor and Senora Ramirez initially thought it was some kind of scam. "No one gives away such expensive tickets," Senor Ramirez said suspiciously. "I understand your concern," Jasmine assured them. "But I promise this is legitimate. You can verify the tickets at the gate." After checking with a gate agent who confirmed the ticket's validity, the couple accepted with tears in their eyes. 52 years married, and we've never flown first class, Senora Ramirez said, clutching her husband's hand. Jasmine continued, offering tickets to a Muslim family who had been selected for random, additional screening, a young Asian woman traveling with her grandmother, a transgender man who had been receiving uncomfortable stares in the terminal, and others who represented the diversity that Harold Reynolds seemed to find so objectionable in his privileged spaces. With each ticket she gave away, Jasmine explained the circumstance behind her unusual action. Most recipients were initially suspicious, then stunned, and ultimately deeply moved by both the gift and the reasoning behind it. "You spent how much money to make this point?" asked Fatima Ahmed, adjusting her hijab as she examined the first-class ticket in disbelief. "It's not just about making a point," Jasmine explained. "It's about redistributing access to spaces that have historically excluded people like us." As Jasmine's guests began gathering in the first-class lounge, many experiencing it for the first time, the airline staff grew increasingly confused. Patricia from check-in had apparently alerted lounge personnel to the situation, but they still seemed unsure how to handle the sudden influx of diverse travelers in a space typically dominated by wealthy white businesspeople. "These are all legitimate first-class ticket holders," Jasmine calmly reminded a flustered lounge attendant who was scrutinizing everyone's boarding passes with unusual care. While Jasmine's guests explored the lounge amenities, she positioned herself near the entrance, waiting for Harold Reynolds to arrive. At precisely 90 minutes before departure, she spotted him striding confidently toward the first-class check-in counter, his expensive leather carry-on rolling smoothly behind him. From her vantage point, Jasmine watched as Harold presented his ID to the agent, not Patricia, but a young man who appeared new to the position. The agent typed something, frowned, typed again, then looked up with apparent confusion. "I'm sorry, Mr. Reynolds, but it seems there's been a change to your reservation. You're currently booked in economy, seat 23D. Harold's posture stiffened visibly. "That's impossible. I was booked in first class on yesterday's flight before I had to reschedule. My status automatically transfers me to first class." "I understand, sir, but according to our system, first class is completely booked for this flight." "Check again," Harold demanded, his voice rising. I'm a Platinum executive member. There's always space in first class for executives. The agent typed furiously, clearly intimidated. I'm very sorry, sir, but first class is genuinely at capacity. Every seat has been purchased. That's absurd, Harold snapped. Let me speak to a manager immediately. As a supervisor was called, Jasmine watched Harold's composure deteriorate. His face reddened, his gestures became more animated, and his voice grew loud enough to attract attention from nearby travelers. Brian Peters, the gate supervisor, approached with a practiced customer service smile. How can I help you today, sir? This is unacceptable, Harold fumed. I'm a Platinum executive member. I've flown over 200,000 miles with this airline this year alone. I do not fly economy. Brian checked the system, his expression growing increasingly uncomfortable. I apologize for the inconvenience, Mr. Reynolds, but our first-class cabin is indeed at full capacity today. Perhaps we could offer you an exit row seat with additional legroom? I don't want legroom, I want the service and comfort I've paid for with years of loyalty, Harold insisted. Who took my rightful seat? Can they be moved? I'm afraid that's not possible, sir. All first-class passengers have confirmed reservations. As Harold's demands escalated, eventually attracting the attention of airport security, Jasmine decided it was time to reveal herself. She approached the confrontation calmly, stopping a few feet from Harold. Mr. Reynolds, she said, her voice steady and clear. Harold turned, his angry expression momentarily blank before recognition dawned. You. The woman from yesterday's flight. Yes, Jasmine confirmed. Jasmine Washington. I believe you're wondering who purchased all the first-class seats on this flight. She held up her stack of boarding passes. I did. Harold's face cycled through expressions, confusion, disbelief, and finally, indignant rage. You bought all the first-class seats, he sputtered. That's impossible. Not impossible, Jasmine replied calmly. Expensive, certainly, but not impossible. A small crowd had begun to gather at the check-in area, sensing the brewing confrontation. Airline staff looked increasingly uncomfortable, caught between a high-status customer and an unprecedented situation. This is harassment, Harold declared loudly, pointing an accusatory finger at Jasmine. This woman is targeting and sabotaging me. I want her removed from the flight immediately. Brian Peters, the gate supervisor, looked bewildered. Sir, Ms. Washington has legitimate tickets. We can't remove her without cause. The cause is harassment. Harold's voice rose further. She specifically purchased these tickets to prevent me from flying in the class I deserve. Jasmine maintained her composure, aware that her professional training was proving invaluable in this moment. Mr. Reynolds, my purchasing decisions aren't about you personally. They're about addressing a pattern of behavior I witnessed yesterday. What pattern? I did nothing wrong. Harold looked around for support. I simply expressed concern about sitting next to someone wearing strong perfume. I wasn't wearing perfume, Jasmine stated firmly. And we both know your objection had nothing to do with allergies and everything to do with my race. The directness of her statement caused several onlookers to inhale sharply. In America, even when racial bias was obvious, naming it explicitly often caused more discomfort than the discrimination itself. An airport security officer approached, drawn by the escalating volume. Officer Raquel Dominguez assessed the situation with practiced efficiency. What seems to be the problem here? Harold immediately turned to her. This woman is harassing me. She deliberately purchased tickets to prevent me from accessing the service class I'm entitled to as an elite member. Officer Dominguez turned to Jasmine. Ma'am. I purchased several first-class tickets, which is my right as a consumer, Jasmine explained calmly. I did so after Mr. Reynolds exhibited discriminatory behavior toward me on yesterday's flight, demanding to be moved rather than sit next to a black woman. "That's a lie," Harold interjected. "I never said anything about race." At this point, an unexpected voice joined the conversation. "Actually, you did." A white woman in her 40s stepped forward from the growing crowd of onlookers. "I was seated in 3A yesterday, right behind you. You specifically said you didn't pay for first class to be seated next to these people," and made several other comments with clear racial implications. Jasmine recognized her, a passenger who had witnessed the entire incident but remained silent at the time. "I was there too," added another voice. A businessman lowered his newspaper. "It was uncomfortable for everyone, but what you did was clearly discriminatory." Harold's face flushed deeper. "This is ridiculous. You're all misinterpreting a simple seating preference." He pulled out his phone. "I'm calling William directly. This situation is completely unacceptable." As Harold stepped aside to make his call, presumably to the airline's CEO he claimed to know personally, the crowd continued to grow. Several passengers who had been on the previous day's flight had recognized Harold and Jasmine, and the story of what had occurred, and what was currently unfolding, spread rapidly through the terminal. Jasmine noticed Darnell Johnson, the flight attendant who had shown her kindness, observing from a discreet distance while pretending to organize boarding materials. Their eyes met briefly, and he gave an almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. Harold returned from his call looking even more agitated. "This is outrageous. Do you have any idea who I am?" "I'm Harold Reynolds, CEO of Reynolds Enterprises. I acquire companies larger than this entire airport for breakfast." "I know exactly who you are," Jasmine replied evenly. "Your reputation in business is well established. Unfortunately, so is your character, as demonstrated yesterday." Officer Dominguez, seeing the situation wasn't resolving, stepped in more firmly. "I need both of you to lower your voices. This is causing a disturbance." "I'll do more than cause a disturbance," Harold threatened. "I'll sue this entire airline and this woman for discriminatory practices and targeted harassment." Jasmine smiled slightly. "Mr. Reynolds, I'm a corporate attorney. I'd be happy to explain the legal definitions of discrimination and harassment to you, and why neither applies to my purchasing tickets with my own money." She paused. "However, your behavior yesterday might indeed meet those legal thresholds. Are you recording this?" Harold suddenly demanded, noticing Jasmine's phone in her hand. "That's illegal without consent." "Georgia is a one-party consent state for recordings," Jasmine informed him. "And yes, I am documenting this interaction, just as I documented your explicit racial comments yesterday." The mention of recordings caused Harold to falter visibly. Like many who were comfortable expressing bigotry in semi-private settings, the prospect of his words being shared publicly clearly alarmed him. At this point, Philip Lawrence, the airline's regional manager, arrived, having been summoned by increasingly desperate staff. "What's happening here?" he asked, looking between Harold, Jasmine, and the gathering crowd. Before either could respond, several voices from the crowd began explaining simultaneously. Philip raised his hands for silence. "One at a time, please." After hearing abbreviated versions from both Harold and Jasmine, along with corroboration from witnesses to the previous day's incident, Philip turned to Harold. "Mr. Reynolds, while we value your business and loyalty status, it appears Ms. Washington has legitimately purchased these tickets. There's nothing we can do about the first-class situation. This is absurd." Harold exploded. "I've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars with this airline." "I understand your frustration," Philip replied diplomatically. "We can offer you a seat on our next flight to Atlanta, departing in 3 hours. We'll provide meal vouchers for your wait." Harold looked around at the crowd, many of whom were openly unsympathetic to his plight. The public nature of his humiliation seemed to finally register. With a final glare at Jasmine, he snatched the new boarding pass from Philip's hand. "This isn't over," he muttered as he turned to leave. Reynolds Enterprises has significant contracts with Thompson and Mitchell. I wonder how your firm will feel about this little stunt when they lose our business." Jasmine felt a momentary chill. She hadn't considered that Harold might have connections to her firm's clients. But she pushed the concern aside. She'd come too far to back down now. As Harold stormed away, several onlookers broke into spontaneous applause. Others approached Jasmine directly, expressing admiration for her courage in confronting such blatant discrimination. "I wish I'd said something yesterday," admitted the woman who had finally spoken up. "I was uncomfortable, but I didn't want to get involved." "I'm sorry." "Thank you for speaking now," Jasmine replied genuinely. "Better late than never." As the crowd dispersed and Jasmine headed toward the gate with her diverse group of first-class guests, she noticed a young woman filming with her phone. The confrontation had been captured, and based on the woman's excited conversation with her friend, it was already being shared online. What had begun as a personal stand against one man's discrimination was about to reach a much larger audience. Jasmine hadn't planned for this level of visibility, but as she considered the potential implications, she realized she wasn't afraid. Some battles needed to be fought in the light. Boarding proceeded smoothly, with Jasmine and her 9 guests settling into the first-class cabin. The scene was noticeably different from the typical first-class demographic. Andre Thompson, the medical student, sat adjusting his seat with childlike wonder. The Ramirez couple held hands, still appearing slightly overwhelmed by their luxurious surroundings. Fatima Ahmed and her brother Samir were quietly examining the extensive menu options. Flight attendants moved through the cabin with professional smiles, though Jasmine noticed their curious glances. Word had clearly spread among the crew about the unusual passenger arrangement. When Darnell Johnson passed through, he gave Jasmine a subtle thumbs up. More surprising was the presence of Melissa Parker, the flight attendant who had failed to address Harold's discrimination the previous day. She now approached Jasmine with visible discomfort. "Ms. Washington," she began hesitantly, "I've been assigned to your section today. I hope the service will be satisfactory." The subtext was clear. Melissa recognized Jasmine and remembered her in action. Jasmine nodded politely. "I'm sure it will be, thank you." As the boarding process continued, Jasmine's guests naturally began conversing across aisles and seats. Andre described his medical school experience to Senor Ramirez, who shared stories of his wife's battle with arthritis. Fatima Ahmed discovered she and another guest, Tamika Williams, had attended the same undergraduate university, though years apart. What began as polite small talk evolved into a remarkable exchange of experiences. The first-class cabin, typically a silent space of individual privilege, transformed into a vibrant community. Several passengers shared their own experiences with discrimination while traveling, stories they rarely voiced publicly but now felt safe sharing in this unusual environment. "Every time I fly internationally, I'm randomly selected for additional screening," Samir Ahmed explained. "Every single time for the past 15 years. I save for months to buy business class when visiting my daughter in California," Senora Ramirez added. "But the flight attendants always assume I'm in the wrong seat. They check my boarding pass 3-4 times." Darnell, passing by with pre-takeoff beverages, paused momentarily. "The stories I could tell you about how differently passengers are treated based on appearance alone." He shook his head slightly before continuing his service. The shared experiences created an unexpected solidarity. These were strangers from different backgrounds, ages, and walks of life, united by the common experience of being treated as unwelcome in spaces designed for people who didn't look like them. Midway through the flight, Jasmine purchased Wi-Fi access to check her email, wanting to see if Tanya Wilson had made any decision about the Evercore account. Instead, she found her inbox flooded with notifications from social media platforms she rarely used. The video of her confrontation with Harold had gone viral. It had been uploaded less than 3 hours ago but already had hundreds of thousands of views across multiple platforms. The hashtag #FirstClassJustice was trending nationally. Jasmine stared at her phone in disbelief. She'd been prepared for local attention, perhaps some professional consequences, but not for becoming the center of a national conversation about race, privilege, and resistance. The comments section under the video was a battleground. Many praised her creativity and courage in confronting discrimination so directly. Others criticized her for wasting money or being unnecessarily provocative. Some questioned why she hadn't pursued proper channels for addressing discrimination, a comment that made Jasmine laugh quietly, given how routinely those channels failed people who looked like her. More surprising were the messages from strangers sharing their own experiences with Harold Reynolds and Reynolds Enterprises. Former employees described a toxic work culture where racial microaggressions were commonplace. Smaller business owners detailed predatory acquisition practices that specifically targeted minority-owned companies. The viral moment had created space for these previously unheard voices. Melissa, who had been noticeably attentive throughout the flight, approached Jasmine's seat. "Ms. Washington," she said quietly, "I wanted to apologize for yesterday. I should have addressed Mr. Reynolds' behavior more directly." "Thank you," Jasmine replied, genuinely appreciative of the acknowledgement. "I was afraid," Melissa admitted. "Not just of losing my job, but of the confrontation. It was easier to try to move you than to address his racism." She paused. "I'm trying to do better." As Melissa moved away, Darnell stopped by under the pretense of offering another beverage. "Just so you know," he whispered, "this flight is all anyone in the crew lounge could talk about today. Most of us are with you, even if we can't say so publicly yet." The pilot announced their descent into Atlanta. As the plane began its approach, Jasmine felt her phone vibrate with incoming calls from the firm's partners. News of her viral moment had clearly reached Thompson and Mitchell. Whether they would view her actions as empowering or embarrassing remained to be seen. When the plane landed and passengers prepared to disembark, something unprecedented happened. Instead of the usual rush to exit, the economy passengers spontaneously paused, allowing Jasmine and her first-class guests to depart first, not because of their ticket status, but as a gesture of respect. The airport terminal buzzed with unusual energy. Several passengers approached Jasmine to express support or take selfies. Local news reporters had somehow learned she would be on this flight and waited near the gate, cameras ready. Jasmine politely declined immediate interviews, exchanging contact information with her first-class guests before they dispersed. Many embraced her, promising to stay in touch and thanking her for an experience they would never forget. As Jasmine made her way toward baggage claim, she spotted a familiar face on a television monitor in an airport bar. Harold Reynolds was giving an impromptu press conference at another terminal, attempting to control the narrative before boarding his later flight. The closed captioning revealed his spin: he was portraying himself as the victim of a social media mob and cancel culture. But the split screen showed the viral video alongside his current denials, his past words undermining his present claims of innocence. Even from a distance, Jasmine could see that few in the airport bar audience appeared sympathetic to his perspective. Her phone rang again, this time displaying Curtis Brooks' number. Her direct supervisor was likely calling to either reprimand her or damage control the situation. Jasmine took a deep breath and answered, prepared for whatever professional consequences awaited her. What she wasn't prepared for were the dozen urgent messages from the firm's partners requesting an immediate meeting upon her return. Whether she had just sacrificed her career for this stand against injustice remained to be seen. The conference room at Thompson and Mitchell fell silent as Jasmine finished explaining the events of the past 48 hours. 8 partners sat around the polished mahogany table, their expressions ranging from concern to outright disapproval. Curtis Brooks, positioned directly across from Jasmine, had barely maintained his composure throughout her account. "Let me understand this correctly," said William Thompson, the firm's founding partner and chairman. At 72, he represented the old guard of Atlanta's legal establishment. "You spent $74,000 to prevent a CEO from sitting in first class because he made you uncomfortable?" "No," Jasmine replied evenly. I spent $74,000 to demonstrate that racism has consequences, even for wealthy white men who are accustomed to their privilege going unchallenged. This firm represents dozens of high-profile corporate clients, Curtis interjected. Clients who may now question our judgment if our attorneys are engaging in viral spectacles. I was acting as a private citizen, not as a representative of Thompson and Mitchell, Jasmine clarified. That distinction means little in the age of social media, remarked Jennifer Mitchell, the firm's other founding partner. Unlike Thompson, Mitchell had built her reputation by breaking barriers for women in corporate law. However, she continued, surprising Jasmine, I'm not convinced this development is entirely negative for the firm. The other partners looked at Mitchell with varying degrees of surprise. Our client base is diversifying, Mitchell explained. Many corporations are actively seeking firms with demonstrated commitments to social justice and diversity. Jasmine's actions, while unorthodox, position us as a firm willing to stand behind attorneys who take principled stands. Or as a firm employing attorneys who make impulsive, expensive gestures without considering the consequences, countered Thompson. The debate continued for nearly an hour, the partners divided on whether Jasmine's actions reflected poorly on the firm or presented a unique marketing opportunity in a changing legal landscape. Finally, Thompson addressed Jasmine directly. Reynolds Enterprises has already contacted us to terminate their legal services agreement. They represent a $2 million annual retainer. Jasmine absorbed this information with a steady gaze, though inwardly she felt a pang of concern for the firm's other attorneys who would be affected by this loss. However, Thompson continued reluctantly, we've also received 14 inquiries from potential new clients specifically requesting you as counsel, including Evercore Industries. He sighed heavily. Tanya Wilson called me personally to confirm their signing with us, contingent upon you leading their legal team. A tentative knock interrupted the meeting. Thompson's assistant entered with an urgent message. The managing partners stepped outside briefly, returning with expressions of disbelief. The National Bar Association just announced you'll receive their Courage and Justice Award at next month's gala, Jennifer Mitchell informed Jasmine. They're requesting our firm sponsor a table. The meeting concluded without clear resolution about Jasmine standing at the firm. She was neither celebrated nor reprimanded, existing in a professional limbo while the partners calculated the business implications of either supporting or disavowing her actions. As Jasmine gathered her materials to leave, Jennifer Mitchell approached her privately. For what it's worth, I would have done the same thing 30 years ago if I'd had the resources. She squeezed Jasmine's shoulder briefly. The old guard is fading, Jasmine. Hold your ground. Outside the firm, the story continued to evolve. The airline issued a public apology and announced new comprehensive anti-discrimination training for all customer-facing staff. Their statement carefully avoided mentioning either Jasmine or Harold specifically but acknowledged recent events had highlighted the need for improvement. Harold Reynolds faced his own professional consequences. Reynolds Enterprises board called an emergency meeting after the company's stock dropped 7% following the viral incident. Investors expressed concern about potential discrimination lawsuits and damage to the company's reputation. 3 days after returning to Atlanta, Jasmine visited her grandmother Eloise, bringing the promised sweet potato pie from her favorite bakery. I saw you on the news, Eloise said, embracing her granddaughter tightly. Your grandfather would have been so proud. I'm not sure it accomplished anything lasting, Jasmine admitted, settling at the kitchen table. Harold Reynolds will probably recover from this. People like him always do. Maybe, Eloise acknowledged, cutting generous slices of pie. But that young doctor you gave a ticket to won't forget. Neither will that Muslim family or that elderly couple. You showed them someone was willing to fight for their dignity. She placed a warm hand over Jasmine's. That matters, baby. Sometimes changing individual hearts is more important than changing the whole system at once. The following week brought unexpected developments. Tanya Wilson called Jasmine personally to offer her a position at Evercore Industries as general counsel, with double her current salary and a seat on the executive leadership team. "We need attorneys who understand that justice and business aren't separate considerations," Tanya explained. "Your actions demonstrated exactly the kind of moral courage our leadership team values." Meanwhile, Reynolds Enterprises announced Harold Reynolds would be stepping back from day-to-day operations, while the company underwent a cultural assessment. The board appointed an interim CEO and promised comprehensive review of the company's diversity and inclusion practices. 6 months later, Jasmine, now settled into her role at Evercore, established the First Class Justice Foundation with a portion of her substantially increased salary. The foundation provided resources for minorities facing discrimination in travel and public accommodations, offering both legal support and practical assistance. The foundation's first initiative funded a study examining racial disparities in travel experiences, documenting the travel tax paid by minorities through consistent downgrading, additional scrutiny, and diminished service. Major airlines, including the one involved in Jasmine's confrontation, reluctantly agreed to participate in an industry-wide task force addressing the study's findings. On the anniversary of her viral moment, Jasmine boarded another first-class flight, this time for a business trip to Chicago. As she settled into her seat, she noticed subtle but meaningful changes in how the flight crew interacted with the diverse passengers in premium cabins, more consistent courtesy, less automatic skepticism, small adjustments suggesting improved training. The passenger beside her, an older black woman, smiled as she adjusted her seat. "Aren't you Jasmine Washington? The attorney who bought all those first-class seats?" Jasmine nodded, still somewhat uncomfortable with being recognized. "My daughter works for the airline," the woman continued. "She says your actions changed things internally, made people have conversations they'd been avoiding for years." As the plane taxied for takeoff, Jasmine reflected on the past year. Her $74,000 stand against injustice had cost her savings and nearly derailed her career. Yet it had also created ripples of change she never could have anticipated: policy reviews, training reforms, and most importantly, countless private conversations about dignity, respect, and whose comfort society automatically prioritizes. The true value of her action hadn't been in the grand gesture itself, but in how it had created space for a multitude of smaller changes. Sometimes justice required dramatic statements, but it lived in the accumulated impact of many individual choices to stand firm against everyday injustice. "Was it worth it?" the woman beside her asked, echoing Jasmine's thoughts. Jasmine smiled. "Every penny." Have you ever witnessed discrimination and wished you could do something about it? Would you have spent your savings to make a point like Jasmine did? Comment below with your thoughts. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share to help spread the message that standing up against injustice matters, even when it comes at a personal cost. Thank you for joining me for this story, and remember that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is refuse to accept the status quo. Until next time. Jasmine's story teaches us that confronting racism requires both courage and strategy. While most people silently endure discrimination, true change demands bold action and personal sacrifice. The $74,000 Jasmine spent wasn't just about denying Harold a comfortable seat, it was an investment in dignity that yielded unexpected returns. We learn that racism thrives in silence. When witnesses remained quiet during the initial incident, they became complicit. Yet speaking up, even belatedly, helped validate Jasmine's experience and strengthen her resolve. The story reveals how privilege operates in everyday spaces. First-class cabins, like many exclusive environments, maintain invisible barriers through unchallenged discrimination and staff who prioritize comfort over justice. Perhaps most importantly, Jasmine's actions show that systemic change often begins with individual stands. Her seemingly extreme gesture created ripple effects throughout an entire industry, opening conversations previously avoided and establishing new accountability measures. The ultimate lesson? Justice sometimes requires disrupting the status quo in ways that make people uncomfortable, including ourselves. The price may be high, but the alternative, accepting injustice as inevitable, costs our collective humanity far more.